So the Gemara we're going to learn today is a Gemara. See if I can pull this off. Is continuing in the Gemara Sota. And towards the end of the Gemara Sota, there's a discussion about the rules of what's called an Egla Arufa. An Egla Arufa is one of the unique mitzvahs of Torah. The Egla Arufa is the mitzvah of finding a cadaver in the field, and nobody knows how that individual died or was killed. And the Torah tells us a unique process in which the members of the great basin in Yerushalayim, as well as the nearby basin, gather near where that body was, and then they kill an animal as a form of atonement. And let's share a little bit about that mitzvah. Now, that mitzvah seems to be not all that relevant nowadays, but the discussion in the Gemara, which I hope to get to, will share a relevant message from within that mitzvah. Hi, David. You're welcome to join us here, or you could join one of the yeshiva students studying in the other room, as you wish. All right, so let me first share a little bit about this mitzvah. It's in the Gemara Sota on 44b. And the Gemara over here, if you recall, we're talking about different obligations in Torah which have to be done b'lashon kodesh in the holy language. So here's the story of the Egla Arufa. The Torah in the book of Deuteronomy, chapter 21, verse number 1, verses 9, commands that if the corpse of a murder victim is found and it is not known who killed him, a measurement must be made to ascertain which town is nearest to the corpse. So they first have to measure. Again, there's a victim, a murder victim. We don't know who committed this murder. So we do a measurement to find out which city is closest. The assumption being that the likelihood is that the murderer came from that closest city. Once that city has been determined by the basin of Jerusalem, so the Jerusalem basin is the one who the Supreme Court of Israel comes, or members of the Supreme Court come to measure the distance from that body to the nearest city. And once they determine where the nearest city is, then they pass on the obligation to the elders of that nearest city. And the elders of that town come bring a calf to an untilled valley, to a place where there is no life, and they kill the animal there. It's actually a unique form of killing of the animal, unlike the typical slaughter. And they then wash their hands over the body of the calf, the sacrificed animal, and they make a statement declaring that they are not responsible for the murder of this individual. The Kohanim, who were present in that location, then pray for atonement. See, this very unique situation. Again, it seems almost fantastical, this idea that there's a body and the basin comes and they measure, then the local city sends their representatives who kill an animal, who sacrifice an animal, who then and then wash their hands saying, we are not guilty for this body here. Fine. That's the basic obligation. The Mishnah on 44b, I'm going to be jumping around a little bit. The Mishnah on 44b explains how specific this mitzvah was and says, if the corpse was found covered by a pile of stones or hanging from a tree or floating on the surface of the water, they would not fulfill this mitzvah. Because the mitzvah, the Torah says, is very specific, which is that it has to be ba'adama, on the land, which means exposed on the land, not covered by stones. Nofel, it says that a fallen body, that excludes the body that's hanging from the tree. In the field, lying in the field, and that excludes floating on the surface of the water. Other exceptions to this mitzvah are, if the corpse is found close to the border. Oh, there's most of the learning is going on in there. You could join a chavrusa there, yeah. If the corpse is found close to the border of Israel, or close to a town which is mostly non-Jewish, or to a town which doesn't have a court, again, the mitzvah wouldn't be done. So basically, in order for this mitzvah to happen, it has to be, the closest town must be a predominantly Jewish town. It has to be a town with a beis din. And then if all these line up, a body is found uncovered in the field, not hanging, not floating, uncovered, then the closest city is a predominantly Jewish city, then this unique mitzvah was done. I encourage you to join the chavrusas in the other room. Yes, you do. A few minutes, 10 minutes. Perfect. All right, so now let's move on a little bit. So that's the mitzvah. So just studying of the mitzvah is itself interesting. But let's move on to a little bit more and what I think is the practical element of this mitzvah. Says the Gemara, the Mishnah later. As if you've been following, you've come to realize that first you have the supreme beis din that comes down. Their goal is to measure, to see which city is closest. Once they do that measurement, then they call the elders of that city. The elders of that city are the ones who bring the unique sacrifice. And they're the ones who wash their hands. The Mishnah says, what do they say once they wash their hands? So they say, Yadeinu lo shavchas hadam hazeh. Our hands did not spill this blood. Ve'eineinu lo ra'u, and our eyes did not see this person. Says the Mishnah, V'chi al datenu also, do you think we really suspect sheziknei beis din shovchi damim, that the elders of that city are murderers? What are they doing when they wash their hands and they say, we didn't kill this body? Would we really have suspected that they did? Had they not said so, they are under suspicion. So the Mishnah clarifies, it doesn't mean that they're not saying we didn't actually kill this person. They're saying we weren't in any way responsible for the death of this person. How so? What they're really saying is, this man did not come to our town and leave without food. This man came because even though that wouldn't be an active form of murder, it would be to some degree a participant or to some level of responsibility of murder. So they say this person did not arrive at our town and leave without food. When it says we did not see him, what they mean to say is we didn't see this person walking on his way out of town and without escorting him. As we took, any person that came to town and we saw, we fed. Any person who came to town and we saw, we helped them walk. We helped walk them out of town. And at that point, the Kohanim, the priests. So that's the meaning of their statement. At that point, the priests make a statement. Oimrim, the Kohanim priests say, Kaper la'amcha Yisrael asher padisa. Please atone for your people Israel, who you have redeemed. V'al dam naki b'kerav amcha Yisrael, and do not place innocent blood in the midst of your people. So this was the prayer over there. So this leads us to a very practical discussion, and that is, what is one of the statements that the sages of that city said? They said, okay, he didn't show up and leave empty-handed. In other words, if he asked for food, we provided food. Oh, that seems reasonable. The idea of providing food seems reasonable. The second thing they say, though, is that we made sure nobody showed up to our town and walked away without being escorted, which leads to a very interesting question. How significant and how important is it to escort someone out of town? It's almost like it seems to equate it with the importance of feeding them. Is feeding someone and escorting them of equal value? So if you look in the Gemara says yes. The mitzvah of escorting someone out of town is actually a very important mitzvah, or escorting someone out of your home at the right time, that is, not while they're expecting to stay, but as they're on their way out. To walk them out happens to be a very important mitzvah. That's what I want to focus on for the next few moments. The Gemara on page 46b tells us something very interesting. Tanya, the sages taught, Haya Reb Meir Omer. Reb Meir would teach, Koifin Lilevia. Koifin Lilevia means we compel a person to escort their guests out of town. Now, it seems to be an unlikely possibility, but what he's basically saying is that if a friend comes to town and asks the host, can you escort me out of town when it comes time to leave? I'd like you to escort me to the exit of the city. And the friend says, no, I don't want to. and the guest says, well, I'm taking you to court. And they go to court. The court can force the host to walk his guest to the exit of town. That's how significant escorting is. I think it bears mentioning that the topic of escorting someone out of town was much more important in the olden days than it is today. Escorting someone out of town was a critical form of safety because roads were dangerous and there were no clear directions. So escorting someone out of town allowed them not to get lost in the wilderness and in the wild. Escorting someone out of town made sure that they can get to the right roads and the safe roads. So escorting wasn't today, it's the concept is pretty foreign, but in the times of the Talmud, escorting someone out of town was a critical act could be a matter of life and death. And that's why in the story of the Eglah Rufa, the elder said, we did not escort this person did not leave, just like we say empty-handed, did not leave without someone escorting them out of town. And here the Gemara references a very interesting story from the Tanakh and says, Sheschar haLevia ein lashir. The reward for escorting someone is without limit. There's a tremendous reward. What's the story which supports this? So the story brings us back to a fascinating period in history. And that is when the Jewish people were conquering Israel for the very first time. At that point, it was Canaan. Joshua led the Jewish people some 3,300 years ago, or 3,290 years ago, to be precise. He led them into Israel, and they had to conquer. So each tribe conquered its designated area of land. And this is referring to the campaign by the tribes of Ephraim and Menashe to capture the city of Bethel. And one of the reasons it was so difficult to capture the city of Bethel, which I believe till today exists, at Bethel, is that the entrance was hidden. So they simply, before conquering a city, you got to know how to get in. And nobody knew where the entrance were. So what happens? Here is what the Torah tells us. Vayiru hashoimrim ish yotze min ha'ir. There were people sent to watch the city to find its entrance. And the watchers noticed a man leaving the town, but they still didn't know where the entrance and exit was. Vayomru lo. And the watchers, the sentries from Ephraim and Menashe said to him, Har'enu na es mevo ha'ir. Show us the entrance to the city. Ve'asinu imcha chesed. If you show us the entrance to the city, we will do kindness to you. Now let's remember, the Jewish people at that time were on an unmatched, successful military campaign to conquer the land that God had designated for them, the land that Abraham had hundreds of years earlier. And they said to this man, show us the entrance and we'll be good to you. Uma chesed uksiv, and it says he complied. Vayirem es mevo'ir. He showed them the entrance to the city. Ma chesed asuima. What was the kindness that they did to this man? Shekol osa ir hagul fi chareb. That even though they destroyed and the inhabitants of the city were killed in the conquest, but osa ha'ishu mishpachto shilchu. That man and his family was spared, sent away unharmed. The Gemara then demonstrates. So therefore, we already see the value. He escorted them to the door, to the entrance of the city. And his life and his family's life was saved because of that. But that's not it. It says that man, Vayilach ish eretz hachitim. That man went to the land of the Hittites, the Chittim, Vayivenir, and he built himself a city, Vayikra Shma Luz. And he named that city Luz. Hushma Adayamazeh. And the sages say that is the name of the city. Until this day, it is known as Luz. Tanya, the Brisa tells us, Hu Luz Shetzavam Bat Chelas. The value of that city, Luz, is the city where they died Techeles, where they died purple wolf for the tzitzis. He Luz Shebasan Cheir V'Loi Bilbala. The power of the city of Luz. And what was the power of the city of Luz? That the man who built it was someone who escorted the people, the centuries from Ephraim and Menashe to the door, the mitzvah of escorting. And that city he built, so his family was saved. He built a city. The city became the business center for the mitzvah of Tchelos, the purple wolf for tzitzis. Sancheirav, when the great powerful Sancheirav, the king of Ashur, Assyria, conquered in his conquest of the Middle East. And he conquered city after city that fell under his control. And one of his methods of ensuring that there wouldn't be rebellion is that he took everyone from any city that he lived in and moved them somewhere else. He felt that as long as people are in their indigenous lands, they are more likely to revolt and rebel. But as soon as you move people from Jordan to Iraq, and from Iraq to Saudi Arabia, and Arabia, this is the area he conquered, to Greece, and as soon as you move them around, so then everyone's a foreigner. So you don't have the power, you don't have the knowledge of the terrain to mount a rebellion. So that's what he did with all of the area. He mixed up the entire area, which is actually a fascinating area of halacha. There's many halachas that are determined because of that. Many halachas in which the Torah says you should behave towards people of this country in this way, towards people in this country in that way. The Talmud says is no longer relevant. Because once Sancheirav mixed everyone up, so the people who are living in a certain country don't belong to that country anymore. So therefore those laws don't apply anymore. Be that as it may, how do you spell the city of Vud? I'm not sure what you're referring to, the city of Vud. Here we're talking about Luz, L-U-Z, L-U-Z. Anyway, Sancheirav, there was one city apparently that Sancheirav did not mix, did not confuse, did not displace, and that was this city of Luz. Nebuchadnezzar came sometime later, but Nebuchadnezzar came, and somehow the city of Luz was not destroyed. And the Talmud says, even the angel of death is not permitted entry into the city of Luz. Rather, the angel of death is not permitted entry, so then what happens? Rather, Elazkenim Sheba, the elderly people in that city, Bizman Shedaiton Kotza Alehen, when their minds become weary of life and they wish to die, Yoitzin Chutz Lachaima, they leave the city and they die outside the city. So somehow the Talmud describes this miraculous city in which Sancheirav, Nebuchadnezzar could not disrupt it. And even the angel of death can't disrupt it, but rather the angel of death, those who die, they die by leaving the city, which is a fascinating concept the Talmud is mentioning, that there's this idea that a person can reach a point in life where they say, you know what, I just no longer have the will to live. And I'd rather die in peace than continue living, which is, it's fascinating, perhaps tragic, perhaps comforting. I don't know. But that's what it says. This city, people would leave in order to die. So he says, what does the Gemara bring us all back to? This is all fascinating, but practically speaking, what does it mean? This seems to teach us a very important lesson. What's the source of the power of the city? The fact that one Canaanite showed the guards from Menashe and Ephraim the hidden entrance to the city, so that the Jewish people could conquer it. He then moved on and built a different city, which became indestructible. The power of Leviah, all this brings us back to the power of escorting someone outside a city. This gave him, and by the way, he didn't even, here's what Gemara says, he didn't actually walk them to the door. He just showed them where the entrance was. And just showing them granted him this type of reward. How much more so when we fulfill the mitzvah of Leviah, which is actually walking someone to the exit of town, how much more so is that mitzvah powerful? Now, as I said earlier, the mitzvah of escorting someone out of town is much less relevant nowadays because today, typically a guest doesn't need their host to show them out of town. We know the exits today even more so. Let's be honest. We have all the directions on our phone. So everything is, the roads are safer, directions are clearer, but the mitzvah of Leviah still exists. The mitzvah of escorting still exists. Firstly, in some situations where escorting is very important, like by a funeral. People think that a funeral is just to sit in the audience and listen to a eulogy. That's not the mitzvah. The mitzvah is that the real mitzvah of funeral is at the end of the funeral, as the coffin is being moved to the hearse or whatever, to walk alongside it. That's the mitzvah. A person listening to these eulogies is not the mitzvah. The mitzvah is Leviah, to escort the body on its final journey. That's the mitzvah. There's a custom some have to escort the Torah. When the Torah is being brought back to the ark, to walk alongside with it, the mitzvah of Leviah. But finally, somewhat as a throwback to this mitzvah, the idea of Leviah, which was often done, and I know in my house we try to do it, and my in-laws are very careful about this, is that if you have a guest in your house, when they leave the house, someone should walk them to the door. I know it sounds minor, doesn't seem to be a big deal. Someone should walk them to the door. Some people are even careful when they leave the door to walk 6 or 8 feet with the guest as they walk out of the house. Because of this concept, the Torah speaks about so significantly about the idea of Leviah, about escorting someone. So this idea of Leviah, which again used to be much more significant mitzvah, and so much so, what does this all come back to? The fact that when there's a body of someone that was killed, we don't know the killer, the neighboring town comes and says, we are not responsible. And when a person comes to our town, we escort them out of town, indicating that if we wouldn't escort them out of town, we would be partially responsible for the fact that they were murdered on the way out. So that's how significant this mitzvah is. But today, a lot of that is not as relevant. So that's where we come back to the other ideas of escorting. When you escort someone, you show them respect. When someone leaves your house and you walk them to the door, or you have someone, one of the children or someone in the house walk in the door, you're saying, your presence matters. Sometimes you leave out when you're at an event, and you walk out and you kind of walk out on your own. You're like, okay, my being here doesn't really make a difference. I come in, I come out, no one notices. When you walk someone to the door, the message you're saying is that, A, we're happy you're here. We value your presence. We value you here. Your presence makes a difference. And therefore, we're escorting you out. Again, not while they want to stay, only when they want to leave. Escorting someone out while they want to stay is highly inappropriate. But either way, this is the mitzvah that this Gemara teaches. And I'm going to stop here because to go arrange the study that's going on in the other room. Thank you, everyone, for joining. I apologize for the delay today. And we'll see, God willing, we'll be back to our studies next week.